turmoil in the southern plantation, love, hate and entanglement among planters, mistresses and slave owners. The jewelry store incident in Charleston, the dignity of the slave owner's wife versus the arrogance of the white mistress. In the late autumn of 1858 in Charleston, sunlight filtered through the gaps of palm trees and fell on King Street. The silverware and gemstones in the jewelry store window glistened brightly in the sun, yet the rich sandalwood scent inside the store could not suppress the suddenly rising tension in the air. Evelyn Carter's fingertips caressed the pearl necklace in the velvet box. It was a memento left by her mother on her deathbed, and also a symbol of the Carter family's status as slave owners. But at that moment, Lillian Hayes was clutching the pearl pendant on the necklace tightly with her hand, her nails almost digging into the silver clasp. "So what if you're the mistress of the Carter family?" Lillian's voice was shrill, with a deliberate provocative tone. She tilted her head and glanced at the surrounding jewelers and planters' wives. "Nathan always says my hands are softer than yours at night. No matter how nice your jewelry is, it's just gathering dust if you keep it." With that, she raised her hand to slap Evelyn in the face, but her wrist was firmly held by Matilda, the black slave housekeeper behind Evelyn. Matilda's rough palm was like a pair of iron pliers, making Lillian frown in pain, but she still held her head high and refused to back down. She was Nathan's white mistress, living in the wooden villa Nathan had built for her. She was superior to the black slaves on the plantation, so she had every reason to be bold and unafraid. Footsteps approached from afar. Nathan Carter was wearing a custom linen suit, and the soles of his boots were still stained with the red soil of the plantation. He saw Lillian being held back at a glance, and his brows furrowed tightly immediately. Before Evelyn could speak, he strode forward and pulled Lillian behind him, his wide suit jacket almost covering her entire body. "Evelyn," his voice was as cold as ice, and there was no warmth in his eyes when he looked at her. "Lillian just likes this necklace. Why are you clinging to it so tightly? I'll have the jeweler make you a better set tomorrow, 10 times more luxurious than this one." Evelyn quietly clenched the hand hanging by her side. Her nails dug into her palm, but she didn't feel a thing. She slowly raised her eyes, a very faint smile curving on her lips, and her tone was as calm as talking about the weather. "My dear, you're right. But the rules of the Carter family are here. Miss Lillian is neither your wife nor a family member recognized by the family. If she takes away the memento left by my mother today, tomorrow the whole of South Carolina will be talking about Nathan Carter, the owner of the Carter Plantation, who spoils a mistress of unknown origin and even throws the family rules aside." She deliberately emphasized the phrase "of unknown origin," and whispers of discussion broke out around them. Nathan's ears turned red. How could he not know that Lillian was just a prostitute he had rescued at the New Orleans dock 3 years ago? If she hadn't sacrificed herself to block the robber back then, he wouldn't have indulged her so much. No one saw the triumph that flashed in Lillian's eyes when she hid behind Nathan. How could she forget that on the steamboat on the Mississippi River 3 years ago, she had deliberately draped her shawl over Nathan, who was under attack, and had been accidentally scratched on the arm by the robber. From that moment on, the way Nathan looked at her changed. He personally built a wooden house for her on the edge of the plantation, went to her place every night, bypassing Evelyn's residence. Even for a silk dress she casually mentioned, he would have the black slaves travel halfway across the state to buy it. This chased-after preference was the only capital she could rely on in this slave society. 2. The power struggle on the plantation, the slave owner's scheme, and the planter's struggle. On the day of the frost's descent, Evelyn, dressed in a black long dress, knelt in front of the church. The flickering light of the candle blurred the calculation in her eyes. "My dear, I'm going to Atlanta to visit my aunt for a week. I'll temporarily entrust the affairs of the plantation to Miss Lillian." She turned to Nathan, her tone filled with just the right amount of weakness. "After all, she has lived on the plantation for so long and is more familiar with the habits of the black slaves than I am." Nathan only thought that she had finally agreed to accept Lillian, so he quickly nodded in agreement. He was already tired of their quarrels, and naturally he was eager to have a chance to ease their relationship. He didn't notice the cold smile that flashed across Evelyn's lips when she turned around at all. On the second day after Evelyn left, Lillian sat upright on the redwood main seat in the plantation owner's mansion, playing with Evelyn's silver pocket watch in her hand. Old Tom, the overseer in charge of managing the black slaves, came in with an account book. He had just said, the rations for the black slaves during the cotton-picking season need to be decided by the mistress, when Lillian slammed the pocket watch on the table hard. Decided by her. She suddenly stood up, her skirt sweeping over the coffee cup on the corner of the table, and the scalding coffee spilled on Tom's hand. You stopped me from using Evelyn's sugar back then, and now you still dare to tell me what to do. Someone, take the warehouse key away from him, and deduct his wages this month. Two tall black slaves immediately stepped forward. Tom clung tightly to the account book in his arms and shouted, "You don't even have the status of a mistress. You're just the master's mistress. How dare you take charge of the affairs of the Carter Plantation?" Lillian was hit where it hurt. Her face turned bright red. She stepped forward personally, grabbed Tom by the collar, and slapped him hard. "I'm the one Nathan holds dear in his heart. I'll be the mistress here sooner or later. How dare you refuse to obey?" She forgot that although Tom was an overseer, he was an old servant left by Nathan's father, and his status on the plantation was far higher than that of a mistress like her. In the chaos, Sophie, the black slave in charge of taking care of Nathan's daily life, passed by with breakfast. When Lillian caught a glimpse of her delicate eyebrows and eyes, a malicious thought suddenly arose in her heart. She had long been jealous that Sophie could enter and leave the main mansion freely, and she was even more afraid that Sophie would gain Nathan's favor. "You black slave! I saw you flirting with the slave in the stable yesterday. Are you having an affair behind the master's back?" she shouted sharply. Before Sophie could explain, she ordered someone to tie her up, drag her to the whipping post, give her 50 lashes, and then sell her to the cotton plantation in Mississippi. Sophie cried bitterly and knelt down on the ground with a heavy thud to beg for mercy, but no one dared to step forward to stop it. Everyone knew that Lillian had Nathan's support. Offending her was equivalent to offending the plantation owner. But Lillian didn't expect that Evelyn had already secretly instructed her trusted black slaves to send a letter to her, Aunt in Atlanta immediately if there was any abnormality in the plantation affairs. When the lawyer sent by her aunt arrived, Nathan was surrounded by planters from the neighboring county, who were talking about him. They had long heard about Lillian's harsh treatment of the black slaves. If it weren't for the sake of the Carter family's reputation, they would have jointly reported her a long time ago. Evelyn also happened to return from visiting her relative, looking tired from the journey. As soon as she entered the plantation, she saw Sophie tied to the whipping post and Tom with a face full of injuries. She quickly walked up to Nathan and slammed a stack of account books in front of him. "My dear, look. It's only been 3 days since Miss Lillian took charge of the affairs, but the rations of the black slaves have been cut by half, the progress of cotton picking has fallen behind, and even the black midwife in charge of delivering babies has been driven away by her. Is this what you call she can help me?" Lillian immediately threw herself into Nathan's arms and cried bitterly, her face full of tears, "Nathan, it's Evelyn who framed me. She deliberately handed over the plantation affairs to me just to make me make mistakes. Everything I did was for you." Nathan subconsciously wanted to raise his hand to pat her back, but he was frozen in place by Evelyn's gaze. "For me?" Evelyn sneered, her voice suddenly rising. "For you, she treats the black slaves harshly and damages the family's reputation. I am the legally married mistress of the Carter family, the wife you bought with 10 crates of cotton. You let a mistress ride on my head. What do you take the dignity of the Carter family and the decency of the Southern planters for?" Nathan was left speechless by the question, and a wave of irritability welled up in his heart. He knew that what Evelyn said was true, but when he thought of the way Lillian had stood in front of him to block the knife back then, he couldn't bear to blame her. "Evelyn, don't be so unforgiving." His voice sounded a little weak. "Lillian is just young and doesn't know better." "Doesn't know better?" Evelyn interrupted him, her eyes full of disappointment. If she really didn't know better, she wouldn't have deliberately cut the black slaves' rations and falsely accused Sophie. "My dear, if you protect her, you are making an enemy of me, of the Carter family, and of the alliance of Southern planters. This sentence was like a heavy hammer, hitting Nathan's heart. How could he forget that the Carter family could gain a foothold in the South all thanks to its alliance with other planters? If he lost their trust, the entire family would be plunged into crisis. 3. Gossip and marriage crisis, the planter's hesitation and the mistress's madness. The cold winter wind mixed with rain, beating against the wooden houses of the Carter plantation. Lillian sat by the window, holding a gold coin in her hand. As she listened to her trusted black slave report the gossip in South Carolina, a ruthless smile curved on her lips. The news that Evelyn and Nathan had not slept together after marriage spread like wildfire to all the plantations. Even the newspaper in Charleston sent people to investigate, and some planters even placed bets on when they would get a divorce. In the South, a slave owner's wife who had no children could be divorced at any time. Evelyn sat in front of the dressing table, looking at her pale face in the mirror. Her fingertips gently brushed the burn on her arm. It was caused by accidentally knocking over a baking pan while baking bread the day before. She stood up, holding a plate of freshly made corn cakes, and walked to the door of Nathan's study. She just happened to hear him lose his temper at the lawyer. Investigate. Find out who is spreading these rumors. I won't let him off if I find out. Evelyn knocked gently on the door, placed the corn cakes on the table. The burn on her arm was particularly obvious under the light. My dear, it's getting cold. Have something to eat to warm yourself up. Her tone was calm, as if she hadn't heard the roar just now. When Nathan saw the injury on her arm, a sense of guilt welled up in his heart. In recent days, Evelyn had never mentioned the rumors. She just silently took care of the plantation affairs and prepared his favorite food for him every day. On the other hand, Lillian did nothing but cause trouble and complain that the black slaves were not obedient enough. He was just about to say something when he saw his mother walk in angrily, holding a telegram in her hand. Look at this. The telegram sent by your aunt in Atlanta says that Evelyn has been wronged in our plantation, and wants to take her back to her parents' home. If you still protect Lillian, I will hand over the family inheritance to your younger brother. That night, Nathan stood outside Evelyn's door. He hesitated for a long time before knocking. Evelyn opened the door, with no expression on her face. My dear, you came to my room just to stop the rumors, right? There's no need to force yourself. I understand. Nathan was embarrassed when his thoughts were exposed. He walked into the room and looked at Evelyn's cold-side face. Suddenly, he felt that he had been so confused before. Evelyn not only took good care of the plantation for him, but also gave birth to a daughter for him. However, Lillian had only consumed his patience and brought him nothing else. Evelyn, his voice sounded a little hoarse, I was wrong before. I shouldn't have protected Lillian and made you suffer grievances. I didn't come here because of the rumors. I just want to be nice to you. As soon as he finished speaking, Lillian's scream came from outside the door. She rushed in, her hair disheveled, and pointed at Evelyn, screaming, Evelyn! You bitch! You stole Nathan from me. He chased me for 3 years. If it weren't for you, I would have been the mistress of the Carter plantation long ago. Evelyn sat on the sofa and slowly arranged her skirt. Miss, you're joking. Marriage is decided by the family. I am the legally married Mrs. Carter. Besides, if Nathan really liked you, why didn't he give you a status, and instead wanted to repair our relationship? Lillian was stunned by the question, and then she rushed towards Evelyn like a madman. Nathan reacted quickly, grabbed her wrist, and his tone was as cold as ice. Lillian, you've gone too far. If you dare to make trouble again, I'll sell you to the sugar cane plantation in Louisiana. Lillian looked at him in disbelief, tears streaming down her face. Nathan, you weren't like this before. You said you would protect me forever. Nathan turned his face away and no longer looked at her. He knew that the little affection he had for Lillian had long been worn away by her repeated madness. He also knew very well that in a slave society, the fate of a mistress was always in the hands of the slave owner. If she still didn't know her place, all that awaited her would be a more tragic end than that of a black slave. 4. The crisis in the delivery room, the life-or-death choice, and the emotional ending. When spring came and flowers bloomed, Evelyn was pregnant with her second child, and her belly was as big as a hill. But no one expected that such a big accident would happen on the day of delivery. The black midwife of the plantation was helping Evelyn deliver the baby. The room was filled with the smell of herbs. Evelyn was sweating profusely from the pain. In her dazed consciousness, she heard her mother-in-law shouting outside, "Save the baby! We must save the baby! If it's a boy, the Carter family will have an heir." Her heart sank little by little. In the South, the value of a slave owner's wife often depended on whether she could give birth to a male heir. If she couldn't, she might be abandoned by the family at any time. At this moment, the door was suddenly knocked open. Lillian rushed in with a sickle in her hand, her eyes full of madness. She had been confined to the wooden house by Nathan these days, and had long been bored. Now that she heard that Evelyn was going to give birth, she was even more afraid that after Evelyn gave birth to a boy, she would completely lose Nathan's favor. "Evelyn, you stole Nathan from me, and now you want to give birth to his child. I want us to die together." Lillian screamed and rushed forward. The sickle, shining with cold light, was directed straight at Evelyn's chest. At this critical moment, Nathan rushed in holding the newly born daughter. He had been dealing with matters in the stable, and had rushed over as soon as he heard the commotion. Without thinking, he immediately turned around and used his back to shield Evelyn. With a puffed sound, the sickle deeply pierced his back, and blood instantly dyed his shirt red. Nathan firmly held Lillian's wrist and shouted with his last strength, "Slaves! Hurry up and pull her away. Protect the mistress and the child." After saying that, he fell to the ground with a thud. His eyes were fixed on Evelyn, and his lips moved, but he couldn't say a word anymore. Evelyn looked at him lying in a pool of blood. The disgust, grievances, and calculations of the past instantly turned into tears. She remembered how he had clumsily rubbed her waist for her, how he had defended her against the rumors, and how he had said, "I want to be nice to you." It turned out that before she knew it, this husband she didn't love had already lived in her heart. She also understood that in this slave society, Nathan was her only reliance. If she lost him, the fate of her and her children would become extremely precarious. Lillian was pressed to the ground by the black slaves, but she still struggled frantically. "Nathan was obviously mine. You stole everything from me. I'm not willing." But her screams were useless. In the end, she was detained by Nathan's mother's order. A few days later, the sheriff of the South came and sentenced Lillian to hanging on the charge of deliberately murdering a slave owner. In the era of slavery, anyone who harmed a slave owner, whether white or black, would not have a good end. On the gallows, Lillian looked at the Carter Plantation in the distance and murmured to herself, "Nathan, I just wanted to be with you." She didn't understand until her death that in this strictly hierarchical society, the love of a mistress was never worth mentioning. Nathan's chasing after her was just compensation out of guilt, never